Well, hello.
Hello.
So we're here to talk about financial things that a board member needs to know, internal controls, audits, and the IRS 990. I'm Louise Schorn Smith. I'm the president of Countryside Consulting, and we provide outsourced accounting for nonprofit organizations in the area. And I'll let my colleague Nick introduce himself.
Thanks, Louise. My name is Nick Hoffman. I'm also a CPA. I am a sole practitioner. I do business and individual tax preparation.
So Megan, tell us about you and your what board or boards you're on, so we get a feel for you.
I sit on the board of the Colonial Theater in Phoenixville, and I have been a board member for about a year, and it looks like that I will be the incoming board president, which is surprising. And so professionally, I work for Fox Rothschild in the tax and wealth planning department. I have been managing trusts and estates and preparing estate, gift, inheritance, and fiduciary income tax returns for about 30 years.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Okay. So we're going to really have a nice casual presentation today, back and forth. So Nick and I would love to have you ask us questions. We may ask you questions so that you really can get something out of this hour that we'll spend together.
Excellent.
Okay. All right, Steph, next slide. All right, we'll start at the very high level here. As you know, I'm sure, all board members have very specific and important duties and responsibilities. And these are the 7 high-level duties that they have. And we're going to focus on the 4th one, which is to protect the assets and to provide financial oversight. And so, you and your fellow board members at Colonial would do this in a number of ways. Okay. So we'll go to the first detailed slide. All right, so this is a list of key internal financial controls. And it's a really useful checklist that I think you ought to use, have your board use and see which of these things you actually do, that you meet these, or maybe you don't. And then you can talk, with the executive director there and whoever does your financial work, right? They'll help you with answering this. But let's just talk about some of these. For example, spending limits. So sometimes it's, boards like to see payments, we say checks, but we really mean payments, because now we do a lot of electronic payments, either through bill.com, through bank bill pay and other methods, right? And so sometimes you'll want checks over a certain amount to have 2 signatures. Usually your executive director is your primary signer, but then there's a second signer when it's large and or maybe outside of your budget, right? So you want to find out if your organization is doing that. And I know Nick and I have both seen organizations that have this, but too low a level.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure it's sufficiently high. I'll often say, people will say, well, how high? What's the right number? Well, the right number is relative to your organization. What's your typical expenditures? If most of them are under 10,000, let's say, your each different monthly expenditure, this thing ought to be probably higher than 10, right? Or in some cases, maybe we're talking about a bigger number, maybe 50,000. I don't know, but we usually like to relate it to budget and regular expenditure level.
And who would be traditionally the second signer?
That's a great question. Often it's the treasurer on the board,
okay,
or the president. Those are usually your 2 most likely second signers.
Okay.
Okay, but generally I'd say any officer can be the second signer is the ideal way to do it. And if people, it's interesting, I don't know exactly what you do at Colonial with your financials, but what we have found with some of our clients that we've had them implement bill.com, which works along with QBO, if you're on QBO, and QuickBooks Online.
Mm.
It's so lovely. It's electronic, and the approvers are electronic. The approver of the bill, the approver of the payment. So it's not like you're driving around and bringing checks to people like the old days. There's ways to be efficient about this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Good question, Louise.
Yeah.
Do you find how do boards come up with the determination of who that second signer is? Is that in the bylaws of the organization or just something agreed upon at the board level?
That's a good question. I would first look at the bylaws to be sure if it's addressed. And if it is, then you're going to follow it. But I'm not so sure I see that usually. But again, most typically I've seen it be the treasurer or the president.
Yeah.
I will say that we are in the middle of a bylaw refresh, and we are using Fox's model bylaws for our nonprofits. And we add those as a separate referenced document. So it's not it's referenced in the bylaws, but because it's more changeable, it's a separate document. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay. And let's just pick one or two other things here. We're just trying to give you an idea to use this list, right? To me, one of the key areas here is reconciliation. Your bank accounts and your credit card accounts need to be reconciled monthly, right? I don't care what excuse anybody has for not doing it monthly. None of them are acceptable. You need to have them done monthly and timely, certainly by the end of the following month. But we try to say, that's the first thing you do. The first week after the month, bank rec gets done because it reveals the sins, or it reveals transactions that have come through the bank that you may not have yet recorded in your accounting records for whatever reason. And you're able to straighten everything up pretty quickly because the cash balance is important to know within your accounting records and for it to be reliable. And of course, by doing that timely, if there by chance had been any kind of fraud on your account, you're going to know it fast. And, usually folks, the financial people are looking more than just once, they're looking within the month at transactions and for a variety of reasons. But you want that done timely, and you don't want it done by the person who is recording cash receipts and cash disbursements, because you're sort of enabling the possibility of internal fraud. So you want it done by someone else wherever possible. And I know sometimes small organizations struggle with this.
Yeah.
But it's best that it's done by someone else. And we'll often say, and the executive director auto look at the bank statement and the rec afterwards. When people know things are being reviewed, they're less likely, to go outside of the internal controls. So, all right, let's move to the next slide. But you get the idea.
I do.
This checklist is trying to help us do, right? Okay, so this talks about, what do you as the board look at with the financial statements? And it could be monthly, or in some cases with smaller organizations, it could be quarterly, but at the least frequent, it should be quarterly, right? So we like to have our boards look at a statement of financial position, right? Which is the same as a balance sheet in the for-profit world, seeing what are your, and again, it can be a summary level, what are your key assets, your key liabilities, and your net assets. Looking at the statement of activity, usually looking at, say, maybe the current year-to-date period with prior years year-to-date as a comparison and year-to-date budget. That's often what we'll do with our clients. Some will like to see the month or quarters and year-to-date, but we try to focus on a bigger picture at the board level and let the ED look at the month and worry about, individual months. And then cash flow. Cash flow for some nonprofits is pretty benign. The biggest number on there is, did you have more cash come in or more cash go out in the month? Not so much what was it for, because they often just have general operations. But those nonprofits that do have investment things going on and purchasing of fixed assets and selling of those kind of things, then the pieces of the statement are more relevant. We definitely recommend that the board receives the budget each year in advance of the start of the year for discussion and approval. Hopefully it's gone through the finance committee first, if your board has one, hopefully, where they really do the groundwork so that by the time the board gets it, it's ready to go. The reporting of restricted funds is extremely important. I can't emphasize enough how important that is for a nonprofit to know its restricted funds, how they're supposed to be used, and how will their folks doing the accounting know to consider them used, and we use the word release. Because you want to do that with your internal records. You don't want to wait for the auditors to figure it out at year end. It's not their job. It's your job to know that and do it. And it's very important, as you would know, for your donors, right? For your donors to have good trust in your organization to use the monies as indicated. Knowing your statement of activities, your revenue and expenses by program, by function is crucial. So, and each of your key functions should be a department in whichever accounting system, right, you're using. In QBO, they call it classes, but it's basically the departments. And of course, you'd have to have at least one department for your administrative function and at least one for fundraising. Sometimes in fundraising, you're going to have several, because if you are running annual events, you are going to have a department for each of those annual events so that each year's activities can be properly reported, not only to you, the board, but when your tax accountant starts the 990, he or she needs that detail because it gets split up in a specific way. Okay. Additionally, analysis is important. If all you're getting are the numbers, you want to say to your executive director and to the person doing the accounting, look, guys, these numbers day in and day out, month in and month out. You tell us what you think is important to tell us about these numbers, right? Especially because folks on the board are not primarily financially oriented. And you need to help people understand the big picture. And then, of course, from the board structure, a couple of these key points are making sure you have a treasurer that does have financial expertise, right? That you have a finance committee and they're meeting and they have a charter, and either the finance committee handles the audit, but if you have the ability to separate it and have a separate audit committee, that's nice to do. And they would have some independent interaction with the audit team. So any questions on this? Any thoughts about this part?
No, this all makes sense to me. And I think that we're doing a decent job. Our treasurer is phenomenal. I hope he never leaves.
Well, and you have to prepare for that.
Yeah, I know. I know.
You have to think about who are you going to bring on the board and groom, it does happen. All right, next slide. Move through a little quicker here. All right. So when you are talking to auditors, there are some key questions here that will help you select the right auditor. And there are quite a few request for proposal templates out there that make it really easy to send out a template, saying who you are, what services you need, what are your deadlines, and then, telling them what you want them to respond to. So this is a nice checklist to have on hand, as a board president, if you should be looking to consider new auditors. And that whole question is interesting. Nick, do you have some input on what you see with nonprofits? Like, how often do they think about checking whether they should go with a new audit and tax firm, or what do you see?
Good question. Yeah, I haven't seen a consistent approach, but it does seem like 2 to 3 years is sort of the timeline for reevaluating and saying, do we need to put an RFP out there to look for a new firm? I think board analysis of the experience with a current audit firm is important. If the experience has been great. You do want diversity though too. You want to changing up who does the audit is good for just diversity of services. So I haven't seen a consistent approach, but I think 2 to 3 years is sort of the baseline of what I've seen as far as getting to that point of considering.
Okay, and I've seen even up to 5 years, where about every 5 years they'll look at it, but because often requests for proposals will be for a 3-year audit time frame, because that allows the auditor in the first year, when they're spending a lot more time getting to know you, and then less time in the second and third year, they're able to spread their cost out.
Keep the fee low. Yep.
Yeah, you usually have about a 3-year run expected. All right, next slide.
And they did start something.
Okay, an audit checklist. And
Automatically
we
connected.
won't go through this in detail, but again, this is something good for you and your board to look at. Again, asking yourselves, do we meet this, or do we need to do some work? Because these are the questions that are asked on the 990. And if you're not answering them appropriately, either with the right yes or the right no, and you have readers, bankers, donors, et cetera, volunteers who will access this, most likely on GuideStar, and read through it and think, well, maybe they're not the organization I want to be involved with, because if they can't even do these basic things, maybe I should get involved with someone else. And so these are important. There's the federal items here, but also the state. Don't forget the state, because all the organizations, the 501c3s in PA, have to be registering with the Bureau of Charitable Organizations based upon their certain rulings. And when soliciting, need to put the proper legal name and the description and where the information is available. There's as you probably know, like a set verbiage that is easy to use, and then you meet these things. So, no one of these is anything I want to call out, but I think it's worth looking at your checklist. Okay. All right, next. And more. Page 2, right? A lot of good information on these checklists. All right, next. Still more? Keep going. All right, so pretty long checklist, right? All right, so now let's turn our attention to the IRS Form 990, and Nick's going to talk to us about that.
Yes. Thank you, Louise. And I think it's a good segue. You've talked about a board member's responsibility fiscally, just to make sure internal controls are where they need to be, everything from bank reconciliations to tracking program revenue, having an auditor that you can rely on that's producing financial reports. Now we're at the point where a 990 also needs to be filed. It's the board's responsibility to understand, and I think what I want to get across is what the importance of the 990 is to the board. I think it's kind of twofold. Number one, you've got financial accountability. So you have responsibility to make sure that what's being represented on the 990 is accurate, is informative, but fiscally, the numbers have to be real. And then transparency. We'll talk a little bit about why a 990 is important, and added transparency is critical for an organization to attract donors, attract, who knows, future employees. Transparency is very, very important at the nonprofit level, and the 990 gives you an opportunity to be transparent. So on this slide, there's a number of questions here. What is it? What is a 990? Responsibility? What information is changed or is contained? And I think I'll just briefly touch on all of those. So I've already said this, the 990 is commonly referred to as the nonprofit tax return. It's really an information return, but there could be a tax component if you've got unrelated business income, which I know is referenced on a few of these slides. That would be income generated through methods that are not consistent with the organization's mission. So that is something to look at. But assuming there's no unrelated business income, it's really a informational return that contains a lot of information, both fiscal and governance related. What changes can a nonprofit make? I mean, we've got, it's really a tool for a board to look at once the 990 is completed, to say, okay, well, number one, how much cash are we holding? Can we be strategic about our future based on the assets that we hold and sort of the direction we want to go? Revenue wise, we'll talk about GuideStar. There's a portion on the bottom that references GuideStar, but you can be analytical to say, okay, how is our revenue growing? If we look at the last 5 years, are we trending in the direction that we want to trend? And does this give us the ability to budget for next year and maybe even a number of years in the future? How are we doing compared to other nonprofits in our sector? As an arts and culture, nonprofit, you can utilize GuideStar to look at other organizations in your sector to say, how are they doing? Are we having challenges, and are they seeing the same fiscal challenges? So a number of things that you can pull from the 990, but I think all of that comes back to the importance. Typically I see a 990 presented first in a finance committee. So, composing a competent finance committee at the board level is extremely important, because those are the people you want to take that in-depth look at that 990 that's initially prepared. And then I typically see the finance committee bring it to the board. So you've got a collection of qualified and intelligent individuals that say, hey, we've taken the detailed, in-depth look at the 990. Now, and we recommend that this is what gets filed. Now, as a board, let's take that information, that recommendation, and do we want to vote and say this is the 990 that we want to file? Because, and I haven't referenced this yet, the 990 is a public document. So once it's filed with the IRS, it becomes a public document. It'll be accessible to donors. So you really want to be confident in the information, again, fiscally and informationally, to make sure that it is properly representing your organization and that the numbers make sense and that you can back them up if you have to talk about them. All right, let's go next slide, Steph. These slides have a lot of great information, and I'm not going to go through and read and go through every piece of this, but it does kind of highlight the different sections of a 990, and it may be unique to each organization. Certain schedules may be more important to your organization as compared to others. I'll just kind of hit on some that pop out. Section A is always one that I think every board and board member should be aware of, at least the finance committee. Section A is the public support percentage. And again, we don't have the rules up here, so it's worth going and learning the public support percentage rules. This can put your nonprofit status at risk if you're not maintaining a certain percentage of public support. So that's what Schedule A shows, and that's just something you always want to make sure you have a good handle on to make sure you don't get to a percentage that's too low that all of a sudden that becomes an issue. You got list of contributors. Again, that just shows diverse community support. So you may have a list of multiple contributors that show, and the names are blocked out, but the amounts are there. So showing that you're getting a good dollar value from multiple contributors adds legitimacy to your organization. Just look, key managers and compensation. So another thing that's shown on the 990 is compensation of your executive director and other key officers. Pretty important numbers. I know from an analysis perspective, within your organization, you're going to be tasked with analyzing the compensation of your executive director. How do we know whether they're compensated too highly, too low? These are public, the 990s public, so a good way to go and look at other organizations, what their executive directors are being compensated as a way to, help your own internal decision making. And then the financial information on the bottom, I'm just looking there. We got the balance sheet, and you can go to the next slide, Steph, because I know we talked the different schedules here. Again, just a whole bunch of good information here. The balance sheet, that may be on the next. Balance sheet is, accounting term. Basically, it's just going to show your end of year assets and liabilities. And I think anybody that has a financial sense, they're going to look at this. I had mentioned cash. Number one, it's going to show your cash balance as of the end of the fiscal year. Pretty important number. You want to know liquidity. Are they sitting on a big cash balance? I mentioned liabilities. You may have payables at the end of the year, so it's nice to show $100,000 of cash. But if the payables match that, well, you kind of know where the cash is going to go. So it kind of shows that liquidity and kind of financial strength. Louise had touched on restricted assets, so that's going to be shown on the 990. You want to know of the fund assets that we've got, how much is restricted versus unrestricted. It shows kind of the ability for the organization to act, to carry out their programs and mission and programs, because they may have assets that are highly restricted. And again, here's a couple more other sections of the 990 that I've kind of touched on, the compensation of there's a bunch of yes and no questions that show the governance. Are there written policies in place? Yes, no questions that, you kind of assume should all be answered a certain way, but still important. I kind of touched on, I think an overall look at this too is you've got a major donor looking at your 990, and I think that's common practice when you get into maybe a capital campaign or, planned giving, donors with major assets that are considering gifting to your organization, they will look at the financial viability. They may go through each page of your 990. So even the simple yes, no questions are just as important as, the programs and all the other sections. Let's go next page, Steph. Okay. Again, there's balance sheet. We've got financial statements and reporting. And we may have jumped over it, but your programs will be listed on the 990s, on the 990. Your revenues and expenses for each of the programs that the organization is carrying out. It gives you an opportunity to put in writing the programs. You get to describe the activities that are being carried out, as well as the finances that go along with them. So again, it's transparency. It's saying, okay, when that major donor is looking, I want to make sure they know exactly what we do, how we give back to the community and carry out our mission. And it's really just I don't look at the 990 as like, oh, we got to do it, like something that just needs to be done. When you're an individual, hey, we all got to file tax returns, right? We have
Mhm.
April 15th, everybody knows, and it gets to be something I got to do it. The 990 should be looked at as an opportunity. There's a requirement to file this, but it's an opportunity for you to showcase uh, whether it's your financial strength or just the mission and the programs that are being carried out. Okay, let's go. And again, some interesting schedules here. I'm going to Schedule L just catches my eye, transactions with interested persons. You can vet an organization. Is there anything shady going on that they've got money moving back and forth between, you don't assume that stuff's happening, but you can have a quick 2-minute conversation with somebody and an organization seems great. And yeah, I'd love to support that organization. And all of a sudden you can get to a 990 and you start seeing some things like, oh, well, maybe there's some things going on that I need to learn more about. So, again, some of these schedules are very interesting, good to know from an analysis standpoint. And then if it's your organization, just be aware this is what's going out into the public that people can review. All right, let's go next slide. Okay. And that's the 990. I know I very quickly summarized and went through, didn't really get detailed on any schedule, but I'd be happy to, outside of this session, if we want to have a detailed review of the 990, I'd be happy to do so.
I am not doing that because then they'll start making me prepare them. So
I hear that. Well, that's why, again, putting together a finance committee, people that are that want to have the experience and the drive to get that stuff
Yeah.
going. It's critical to have that piece of your board solid. Um, our next few slides are going to talk about GuideStar, and Louise, feel free to jump in here. And I think GuideStar it's really cool from an online platform for a nonprofit to be able to show who they are. And it's transparency. That's exactly what GuideStar provides. What a great service GuideStar is. This first slide, I want to just highlight the kind of middle graphic, the seal of transparency. Number one, I urge you to get in and look at your own organization and see what your GuideStar profile looks like. What is your seal of transparency level? Because that anybody that's aware of GuideStar may look at that. And you start at the bronze level, and the more information you put into GuideStar, the higher your seal of transparency level will rise.
Have
And you
you
should
looked
strive.
at this? I'm sorry, Megan, have you looked at your GuideStar
I
ever?
just did for the first time. We're
Good.
gold.
Okay,
Okay.
So
it's good to read through
yeah.
what you have there, make sure it is accurate and current.
Accurate and current, very true. Current is because this may be the spot that a future donor goes to review your organization. So having everything current, and what great the 990. I'm a numbers guy, and I appreciate a tax return. It's what I deal with in my professional life. So I can look through a tax return and kind of get the story, but um, not everybody enjoys reading a tax return, let's be honest. So I think GuideStar does an awesome job of putting numbers into a format that is easy to absorb. without losing your focus and saying, man, this is boring. It's a bunch of numbers. So we can go to the next slide, Steph, because I think the next few slides just show kind of examples of what you're going to see on GuideStar. Yeah, this slide just basically says, hey, go to your organization's profile, get it updated. It's free. Oh, by the way, at the very top of the screen, the Community Foundation has been kind enough to lend our Community Foundation credentials to log in. So if you want to just hop in, if you don't have your own login, if you want to hop into Community Foundations,
Oh,
just
cool.
browse and see what the other organizations look like. You get all the detail that way.
Yeah, you can get more in depth with the community foundations login than just a free one.
Okay.
It would have.
Yep. We can go to next slide. Yeah, here's a great example of what I was saying. Sometimes there are visual learners out there. So rather than just seeing a bunch of numbers on a screen, here you can get charts and bar graphs and um, analytics on specific items, which I think is really cool. I was looking at a senior center that I'm involved with and the number of meals that they serve, and it showed the growth year to year. And I was like, man, what a very specific but important, for this organization, it's a very specific but important piece of who they are and what they do. And if I'm a donor that's aware that this organization is doing meal delivery, and I get to that screen and I can see that growth, I'm just thinking, man, a donor can be very impressed by that. It would solidify the reason they want to support that organization. So, man, the varying levels of information that you can derive from GuideStar is so impressive. And again, it's at the organization's level. It's your responsibility to provide all that information to get that transparency level where it needs to be so that it's there.
And I think, Megan, that as the board member and incoming president of the Colonial Theater, if I were you, I would want to look at other theaters' GuideStar profiles, right? You've got the Uptown Theater in Westchester. You got People's Light in Malvern.
Mhm.
You've got some small theaters in Philadelphia that might be of a similar nature, similar size. And you garner so much good comparative information to see where you might be in line, better, worse, et cetera. So as Nick said, he was analyzing some senior center data in here. And I've done that before for senior center clients where, I compared them with 4 or 5 others so they could see how they stood on, at key parameters.
Mhm.
Let's go to the next slide, Steph, because I think we're actually going to look at exactly what you were saying, Louise.
Oh, good. There it is. Mhm.
Here we are. And like this report right here, that analysis you were just talking about, Louise, it's displayed in an easy to read format. Again, you can do it regionally. So here's Chester County Senior Centers, very specific, all the financial data from revenue expenses, balance sheet composition, everything. And again, it's a snapshot in time. So it's not the end all be all, but it's just a tool that you can use to help make decisions, to get a clue of what's going on out there with other similar organizations.
Mhm. And what's nice about it is, even though these 5 centers may not be the same exact size, if you look into the middle of this slide, and you look at, say, expense composition, it'll show it to you by percentage. So it'll say, well, Oxford's personnel costs are 53.8% of their total costs, while Kennett's is 46 and Westchester's 41, et cetera. You get a feeling for how they're spending their money within their total expenditures. So I love the percentages.
Great point. Great point. Not every organization is the same. They're not the same size. They're not, even though they may be senior centers, they may have different programs that require different expenses that get different types of funding. So all those things to keep in mind, but the percentages will sort of level that playing field a little bit.
Mhm.
Great. I know we have a few minutes left. I tried to get through this fast enough so that we could have a little discussion. I know Megan, you've been vocal here, and do you have any questions for us? And I know you said you just got into GuideStar. I'm just curious your feelings now that you're aware of GuideStar and what
Well, I
is something
think that
now
we,
you think you
I
got to do a
think
little
that
work
we are
on
gonna
it?
need to schedule a yearly update of our GuideStar profile. And I mean, I'm sure that the 990 gets filed every year. I know that it does, but the other things on there are a little dated. So I will bring it up. I'm not sure who on our staff updates it. I suspect that it's our development person, but I could be wrong. But that might be at least an annual review.
Right.
That's a good question, Megan, that I'm curious, Louise, if you've had experience with boards, who takes the task of GuideStar and saying, hey, I want to
Yes.
make sure we've got everything there. Is it the executive director or is it the board?
Generally, the executive director should be the one doing it. Often a development director may assist with some of that information, of course. And the board isn't the one doing it. The board should be, told, we've updated it. Everybody go take a look, give us feedback if you'd like. But really, it's management's job, to keep this up to date.
Yeah.
So, the other thing I would like to say here in the, as we close the session in the next, 10 minutes or so, what we've looked at here are several really useful checklists, right? Questionnaires. And so I think, Megan, I would recommend you take, say, that internal control audit list, and say to the executive director and the accountant, hey, I'd like you to complete this, and then let's go over it together. Let's see where we think we might have some issues to improve on. And I'd also take that 990 primer, because there were like key questions in there that said, well, if this, then maybe you want to think about that.
Right.
And that would be another thing to give to the executive director and the accountant, who's doing work, to say, could you all just, casually answer some of this and let's go over it. I wouldn't give it all to them at once. That would feel like a heavy weight.
Yeah.
But maybe one at a time, because if they think about it and answer it, to the best of their abilities, that together you're going to find ways to improve the organization.
Excellent.
And as the incoming president, there will be, you'll find, I think at Colonial, I would think you'll find, a certain amount of reassurance that you're doing things right.
Yeah.
But, there'll be some little areas to tweak at least, and always worth identifying those.
Excellent. Folks, how can I get a copy of the checklists?
Steph.
Good question. Yeah, Steph, do we have these slides that are available? I believe we've got the slides available. I know that, the whole presentation here is being recorded, so you could always go back that, but I believe we've got
we
a
will
PDF.
send them out. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Folks, I have a hard stop because I have a 1 o'clock, but thank you so much for this. It's been tremendous help.
Wonderful.
It's a lot to learn.
Yeah. After you use these checklists, it'd be great if you gave Steph some feedback and she could share it with us later.
Okay.
Did this work really well for you as a board member to take these tools and go to your management and, dive in deeper?
I'd be happy to do that. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank
Nice
you,
meeting
Megan.
you guys.
Take care.
Great to
All right,
meet you and good luck.
bye. Thanks.
Awesome. Great job,
Uh,
Louise. I know we have others in the Zoom here. I don't know if
Oh,
anybody.
I didn't even see. Kaya's here, it looks like. Kaya, do you have questions?
She may have stepped away.
Okay.
And Donna is also in the room too, I think, I saw. Or she snuck out.
Donna just left.
Well, I'm gonna stop the share here. And I'm going to say thank you very much for doing the all of it. I'm just gonna stop the recording as well.